Hello, everyone. If I could get everyone to take their seats. I think there's a few more empty seats up front here for some of you that are standing in the back. And we'll get started. Good morning.
Good morning.
They're here. They actually showed up. Well, welcome and hello to what I think is going to be a very special and important session today. I know many of you, and it's good to bring this group together today to talk about this topic, which is on everyone's mind a lot, self-ID. 1 year ago, this group convened for the first time, and it was virtually, but it was very clear that there was a lot of work to do, and there was also an unbelievable amount of creativity and innovation and thought that had already gone into this from various directions. And so this is where we're pulling all of this together to move self-ID to the next level. So our working agreements today. This session is for people that have established self-ID programs. If you haven't started one yet, or you've just started one, this is going to be a little advanced. It doesn't mean you won't get something out of it. You will. But know that this isn't how to begin it, how to start it. This is really how to take an existing self-ID program that you've had for a number of years, like our panelists, and how to revitalize it, how to take it to the next level and take it to new heights. So think of it as self-ID 301 instead of self-ID 101. This is a byproduct of a self-ID consortium of about 30 companies from all across the US and beyond. And this consortium is in the process of developing a guidebook that will come out at a later date. And so your participation in this today, and what you may have understood a week from today, which is the follow-up session for this virtually, your input is going to help guide what is included in that guidebook that will go out to everyone. So make sure that you have also an understanding that we have a lot to cover, and these people have a lot to share on this subject. It probably will be a little tough to do a lot of Q&A, but know that is going to be wrapped into this virtual session that's going to happen 1 week from today, a lot more. So this is really the jump start to the topic. So, up here is my picture. I am Steve Smotherman. I am the Director of Advisory Services with Out and Equal. Some of you may go, I know him from somewhere else. I spent 15 years at Cracker Barrel, Old Country Stores. I had been to, this is my 13th summit. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm excited to be here today just to moderate these subject matter experts for you. We are going to be using some, let me see, what's next here? Some polling today, some Mentimeters, and know that everybody's pretty familiar with that. It gets used in a lot of workshops. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the Mentimeter information and results. You can go back and revisit it later and add to it. It's not like once this session ends, the Mentimeter goes away, but know that you can continue to do that. But in the interest of time today, we're going to collect this important data and answers and survey information from you, and we are going to go deep into that in that follow-up 1 week from today. So let's look at our esteemed panel, and I'm going to let each of them take a turn in introducing themselves. Now, what I'm going to ask is you just share with us, introduce yourself, share how long your organization has had self-ID, share something you consider to be a highlight of self-ID, and if you can be so candid, just share also what something might be that's holding your self-ID program back. So we'll start with Brad, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening if you're with us virtually today. Brad Baumel. I'm with JP Morgan Chase. I'm our global head of LGBT plus affairs. You probably heard me speak yesterday, maybe once or twice. Really happy to be here today. I'm super proud of our self-ID program at JP Morgan Chase, which has exponentially taken off since we set up the office that I run. We began officially collecting self-ID data that's like in our core HR systems back in 2015. And while we're currently on the Oracle platform, this is our second iteration of technology, so we did a conversion from one to another. And like many vendor platforms, there's nothing perfect about it. So I'm most proud that last year we grew 50%, like literally in 1 year. Our LGBT plus self-identified numbers grew 50%. And I set a target this year, because I'm all goal driven, of at least achieving that same absolute growth. So the same physical number of net people new in the community at the firm, and we just last month surpassed that. So super excited about that. And then the opportunity, and there's 1,000 opportunities, we're gonna talk about them quite a bit today. My biggest opportunity is that I'm still at 43% of people who have filled out the sexual orientation question globally. And I ask the questions in every country where it's not illegal. And for us, that's about 23 of our countries where we operate. But the really great part of it is it's like 97% of our employees. So I'm going to hit 5% soon. And that's phenomenal on a global basis. I don't know anyone that's near that yet. And that's with 43% who have filled out the field. So.
Okay. And
Excellent.
Chris?
My name is Chris Crespo. I am from EY and been there a few years. I lead up our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts around our employee resource groups, our LGBT inclusiveness strategy for the Americas, and basically anything else that comes up that needs someone that's been there longer than they probably should. So I've had the luxury of being there for over 30 years. We began collecting this data a little bit earlier, frankly did it in a couple different ways. We did it first through our employee engagement surveys, and then we moved into the HR systems. So HR systems actually began a couple years after we started collecting it first as an employee engagement survey. But we are now using SAP SuccessFactors as part of it. As we talk a little bit further, I'd say that's part of our challenge. We switched systems about 3 years ago. But part of the ability of doing that was it gave us the ability to go to over 40 countries in doing it. So we are in about 150 countries around the globe when you look at that. We went individually, country by country, and asked them to do it and had an education process as to why it was important. Over 40 agreed and have now gotten to the point where they are asking the same questions around the globe around sexual orientation and gender identity. When you look at the completion rates, I don't like that we have it in red. I'm going to say these are Christmas colors. It's not a stoplight. It's the
Italian flag.
It's the celebration as well. Well, from a U.S. perspective, we have about 11% completion rate, which shows a 1.3% completion. That actually is to me just a piece of the puzzle, because when you look at other countries, we have other countries like Canada that have gotten as high as 82% completion rate. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons why we see completion rates being higher in some places than others and some of those successes. But I also like to think about it as it gives you open interpretation of the numbers, right? Because as Brad was saying, 5%, you're shooting for 5%.
I want to be at 21%, which is what Gen Z identifies as, but that's a multi-year plan. So I want to be at 5% sometime early next year.
And I'm already saying maybe we're already at 12% when you do the extrapolation of the 11% and the
exactly.
So there's lots of ways to look at these numbers, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of that as well, because there's some funny stuff that happens here in all of this, but hoping to get to that point of talking about that all that evolution of how we actually get people to answer this stuff.
Great.
Michael?
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone. I'm Michael McCoy. I'm a lead diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant with Wells Fargo. I have been with the company for 23 years. Most of my time was in corporate communications, and I just made a career change last year into DE&I, and part of my role has been helping orchestrate a communications and awareness campaign around the topic of self-ID. We actually started collecting data on LGBTQ plus demographics in 2011. I think prior to that, did some type of informal tracking, but we too just converted from PeopleSoft to Workday earlier this year. So what we're learning is the user experience and the intuitiveness of going into Workday, our official system of record, is clear as mud. There are 3 different categories in the system where people have to go in order to share self-ID data across the board. So really what we're trying to do is create awareness and conversation. The main thing I think I've heard from those of you who have asked me is, what is it? Why is it important? Why should I do it? We're really trying to provide guidance around that. We'll talk a lot about that today. I'll call out a couple of things that we're proud of. We also include pronouns. We give our employees an opportunity to self-identify pronouns. And then we just recently added a question for domestic partners and military spouses. We know that is an underrepresented part of the employee population. Often they have to uproot their careers and move to different parts of the country. So we really want to have a more concerted effort on how we can better support that demographic of our employee base. I would say too, a couple of things. I didn't have data on these metrics. We have about over our total employee population, we only provide the opportunity to self-ID in the US currently. We have a lot of efforts underway to roll out self-ID for employees outside of the US. Based on our data, we have about a 44.5% response rate. That is employees answering the question, either I am not, I wish not to disclose, or I am LGBTQ. And those who have positively said they're LGBTQ, it's about a 2.9% of our total employee US base. So that's what I would share to start. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as you can see, we have some very knowledgeable and experienced folks with self-ID up here, but they also are sharing that they have opportunities. So one takeaway I want you to hear loud and clear is you are not alone in this, and you can tell that by the number of people in this room. All of you have had self-ID at some form for the decade or so, and I would say there's many people here in the audience that have as well. And the focus today is really going to be on to ensure that your organization is doing everything you can to collect more accurate self-ID data and ultimately use that data to impact your LGBTQ plus employees and their experience in all of your workplaces. There are 3 areas that we're really going to focus on today with our discussion, and that's going to be evolving self-ID to be more inclusive, fueling adoption, and using the data to inform strategies and priorities in programming, which is the ultimate goal. So let's dive right into the first one. Evolving self-ID to be fully inclusive. And with this one, I'll ask you all, and we can start wherever or whoever wants to start. How are you evolving self-ID? You've done it for a number of years. So describe that evolution a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start here. And this is the hardest thing in the world for me to do is sit here for 45 minutes. So if I move forward a little bit and it's distracting,
We'll trade places.
I'll apologize a little bit. And this actually gets into the next question a little bit too. So I'm going to combine my answers and I'll skip the next question. How's that? But our evolution has really been to take it global in the last few years. And as a part of that, our journey was very specific to the US, the UK, and then Australia. I always laugh at the English-speaking countries seem to pick up on some of this first sometimes. and it doesn't go without some truth to it. But we now are in a number of different countries, as I noted. So you have language difficulties, you have a terminology, you have difficulties in understanding terminology. And the biggest part of our effort in really going globally with this was coming up with what are the terminologies going to be. So I would say that we are 5 years into that journey now, and I'd say that there are some learnings from that. And I would caution against trying to do that. When you look at self-ID, it's usually broken into country specifics around self-ID and then what you can ask globally. And to me, it was an easy question to ask globally, right? It's not. And as a result, the terminology that we had to agree on and reach consensus on is probably not as resonating, it's not resonating as much with our US population now. Many of the terms that we're using in our actual questions end up looking antiquated to people coming out of school now. And as Brad noted, depending on which survey you're looking at, up to 30% of our college grads coming out are identifying on the spectrum, not on the binary. The terminology, you gotta be very specific on how you're addressing the populations by country. So that would probably be the biggest thing I would say from a learning perspective that I would bring back out. If I had to do it again, I'd go back to the country. And I'd say country by country, let's come up with our specific ways that we're going to identify rather than trying to keep it global, because it gets very difficult to do it globally and try to get a lot of specific information. But from an evolution perspective, we are working on campaigns that we hope will resonate with everyone. That is also difficult when you're looking at culturally different elements. We learned a lot through this journey in trying to come up even with visuals that would be able to resonate globally. And so we came up with some stuff that works first, but you still always need to drive down and use the culture of the countries to help elevate it up and lift up the things that you're talking about when you're evolving your self-ID, so that you can get to the actual populations that you're trying to reach in the different geographies that you're trying to get to.
And isn't it true that internationally, it's a constantly moving target? I know Spain passed a law, a year ago or so, and it makes it virtually impossible to ask hardly anything around the self-ID. And they're a fairly progressive country in many ways, but that's just one example of how you've got to stay on top of each and every country individually, both legally, culturally, and in many other ways to make the most of it.
I just had to remove it from Germany.
So they've had it
So
too,
like
yeah.
it literally changes all the time. So add, delete, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Michael, you want to?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is but to be inclusive of international, because we don't currently have the opportunity for international employees to self-ID, we've brought self-disclosure into the conversation as well. And what I would just quickly say about those two, self-disclosure is having a conversation, sharing your diversity dimensions with another person or in a room setting. So in countries where we don't have a system for people to go in and identify themselves, we're encouraging people to start having conversations, to really start getting more comfortable in that space. So when we do have the opportunity to provide employees to the system of record, hopefully we'll see a higher response rate on that.
Very good, very good.
Michael, do you want to talk about evolving before we go on?
Yeah, I mean, I would add, I mentioned pronouns earlier. One of the
Yeah.
things I had on my slide is that we lump LGBTQ together. I think often we hear from people that I want to be able to identify outside of alphabet soup. And my reaction to that is like, let's all kind of get counted first, because I think the more data and metrics that we have, a better response rate, it gives more attention to the community, and then we can evolve from there. So it's really trying to get us all at a place where we're comfortable just answering that question so we can go to future phases of the evolution and kind of break it out and be more nuanced.
Yes.
So evolving to me, so I had 2015 on my slide. We were collecting self-ID data a decade before that, but in our employee opinion survey, and it was the kind of questions you were saying, are you LGBT+? To me, that's not counting. So for JP Morgan Chase, evolving meant integrating the questions into our HR systems. So 2015 was our first implementation, and asking legitimate, real questions. So what is your sexual orientation? And I'm continually evolving the answer set, because I still have 25% that are picking other. which is part of the community, and I clearly state that, but that means I'm missing. I am not being inclusive enough. So a great example of my evolution personally is I'm adding queer to sexual orientation in November when that goes in. Even though I'm like an old schooler and the word still doesn't mean like a good thing to me, but I know all of my Gen Zs, that's how they relate. They hate labels. So, and probably more than Gen Zs, I'm older than many of them. So
I'm with you.
I continue to evolve the questions and the answer sets. So we've got what is your sexual orientation? What is your gender identity? Are you transgender? Are you open at work about your status? We're going to talk about what that means later, because I'm going to use that for really important things. So, and we're evolving globally. To your point, you can't have the same answer set everywhere, which I'll get into the next question.
Yeah. Wow. So the next question, how are you incorporating intersectionality and globalization? It's kind of a natural progression from that first question into your self-ID.
I think you started answering
You
that,
started,
so you need
yeah,
to
I started.
continue.
I'll go. So I love this stuff. I'm a data geek, first of all, and I have all of it, which is very rare. But that's because of my office, right? That's because that is my job day in, day out. So for me, I have every slice of data you would ever imagine, every letter of the alphabet, by city, by country, by region, by line of business, by corporate title. I know, where my issues are, whether it's in this country, I'm 15% LGBT plus, versus in this country, I'm 1%, or in this line of business, 1.5%. I know in Asia, my out at work rates are 10% in some countries, which takes my global total down because I'm only at 55% out at work globally, but that's not the US or the UK. So I'm building our strategy around the data because the data is telling me where my opportunities are and what my employees need the most and how I should be reaching out to the community. And then I'm integrating it with intersectional data. So what does it look like by ethnicity and gender? And that then informs, if you came to my session yesterday in this room, that then informs how I need to be collaborating with the other 6 centers of excellence. Because what are the opportunities at the intersections between our community, which exists in all of the others, and the other COEs, some of whom have much bigger budgets than I do. So that's how I'm building intersectionality and globalization into our self-ID program.
Very good. Anyone else?
Well, I'll keep it brief. We're underway to make it available for global employees, so more to come.
Yeah.
This to me all just hits on reporting, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. So this all gets commingled with that aspect of it. But what I hear you saying too, Brad, is that you're finding ways to give the definitions that resonate within each country, but still being able to compare the data country to country, which is key in being able to use the data.
It totally is. And I don't want to go to the minutia, right? So we have every letter in the alphabet, and some of the letters represent multiple things. I don't want to capture the 0.1%, because what are we going to do systematically, programmatically for a community that's 0.1%? So I know I'll always have others, but I need to get where the community is, because that's going to inform what they need.
Yeah.
And do you all see the future of all of this just keeping up with the next generation and the next country you go into and so on?
I mean, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, to me, the biggest challenge is that we keep evolving our definitions. And as we evolve our definitions, in order to keep up or seem like we're keeping up, you have to make sure you're always tracking it back and always coming back to asking the questions in the way that are going to resonate with people.
Okay. All right, so next slide. There we go. Now we're going to take a Mentimeter poll. So if you've got, I know you have a device. I know everybody in here has probably 3 devices they could do this on. And we just want to take a quick moment. to see in this beautiful free form.
Was
What
gay so
pops
big
up?
because it's only 3 letters? And it's
Yeah.
easier to type in real quick?
No. Yeah. It's not the larger font for the smaller word. It should be the number of votes, right? The number
Yeah. It's,
identified.
So you know what I love most about this screen is that we're all so multifaceted, and it's so far beyond sexual orientation. I think one of the best things we did in our evolution of self-ID was we brought it all together on one screen. To your point about multiple places, I mean, and it's everything, in pronouns, chosen name, military status, spouse's military status, disability, marriage, like everything we ever would want to dream about collecting to inform our budgets and capacity and prioritization is on one screen. And so while
It's
none of it is
beautiful.
mandatory, which, you know, kind of sucks because then sexual orientation is only at 43%, it's still all in one place.
Yeah. I just want to point out, Chris, that gay is getting smaller.
it is. And queer is getting larger, which I'm kind of,
I'm not threatened, but but I can say maybe it was because it was a 3-letter word and just quicker to type in.
no, but what I actually love about what's popping out in here is that we're seeing people go beyond
Yes.
the LGBT plus
Absolutely.
acronyms that
Beyond the
that we're used
alphabet
to.
soup,
So,
yes.
because we do. I mean, I identify as a parent. I identify as a survivor of cancer. You could go on. The list is many, many, many. It's when we start to understand how those pieces all come together is really where we start to be able to use the information and show people how we can use the information.
So let me ask, did we get 100% participation? It's kind of like a quick self-ID checkpoint. So we will check into this, and I know this will be dived into more in the follow-up next week. All of these Mentimeter results will be. So I could stand and stare at this for way longer than we have today. So let's go to the next topic of focus, which is fueling adoption. And would one of you care to explain what that means, fueling adoption, for someone that might not be familiar, and then just share how is self-ID adoption, in your organization right now currently?
You want to be the lead off this
Sure,
time?
I'll be happy to. So for us, I mean, as I mentioned, we have almost a 45% response rate to the LGBTQ plus question. So I think we are doing well, but certainly have a lot of opportunity. The main thing is really, with the new system of record coming on earlier this year, is creating awareness, conversation. So I think that's going to lead to adoption. One of the other things that we think is really important is senior leader advocacy. So we were very strategic about rolling out our communications and awareness campaign in the month of October, which aligns with Global Diversity Awareness Month. That ties into the self-disclosure piece that I mentioned to include international. But it's really creating awareness, breaking down those barriers, demystifying what it is, why it's important, and why you should do it, and really leaning into leaders at the most senior levels of the company to help support and carry that message throughout the organization.
Yeah, on point. It's engaging people to actually go in and complete it, and then having them understand what it means to actually complete it, but not complete just one part of it. So if you've gone in and completed a question or two, you haven't completed your self-ID, and understanding that you're completing all aspects of you're answering all the questions.
Right.
Yeah, and you said leadership. Just to refer back to that, you said leadership and getting them involved. Just, any of you have any examples of how leadership has demonstrated the importance of self-ID?
Yeah, part of what our strategy, my role, previous role coming from corporate communications, is really putting together messaging that communications partners who support operating committee members who report directly to the CEO. So it's easy for them to plug in. So as they're speaking from the podium or a town hall or a written communication, we have a very consistent message that can be plugged in across the board, so that employees are either hearing it or reading it or seeing it coming directly from the leader that they're most closely aligned to. And that, I think, kind of meeting people where they are, with trust being one of the biggest factors in it, we're hoping that will help kind of put some wind in the sails.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anything to add?
Yeah, so I'll start with adoption and then we'll go on to campaign management, which I think is next. So for us, and I've spoken about our adoption rates for sexual orientation, which is 43%, which I think is horrible, although maybe I shouldn't think that, but high bars, high bars. Our biggest issues with adoption are disability, military, and sexual orientation, followed probably by ethnicity. And ethnicity is better in some places than in others. So like we've got a big black identification problem in Europe where you can collect it, so like the UK. So we together do a lot of collaboration because of the intersection of our communities, but we all need to do it. And I think we're gonna get to campaign management next. What is important though is I can't think of adoption just for our community. I need to think of where are the gaps and how could we work together to close the gaps.
Yeah, yeah. And another one that I think that I've heard recently is around able-bodied or people with different challenges, because it's difficult for people to check that box that say, you know, I have anxiety disorder, I have ADHD, and that's something that is, it's not including everybody, and it's very important. And I know a few organizations have actually taken that data and created wellness programs. I mean, how much more important could that be in the totality of what this whole self-ID thing is? So, and the next question I'm going to ask is, you know, what are some of the barriers that you see to the responses? We've hit on a few of these.
Yeah, I mean, we've all said it in one form or another already. Technology is still part of the problem.
Cumbersome.
And making sure that you're lining up the questions in a way that people have access to them in a very simple way. When you take, and a lot of this comes to your approach. Why are you collecting this data? Are you collecting it for compliance purposes, for federal contracting purposes, for EEOC purposes, or are you collecting it for DEI purposes? And you need to get those parties together to make sure that you're collecting them coherently for all those purposes. But then you start getting a little frustrated in how you word the questions then in some respects. So it's asking the questions and then having identities that people can identify with is a big one that we hear. Even from a race and ethnicity perspective, if you're using US EEOC terminology, we've heard over and over again, people who are Middle Eastern do not identify as white, but the US government considers Middle Eastern to be white. And so you have all of these different nuances, and if I don't identify in one place, then why am I going to identify with the rest of these that have different definitions of something that I would specifically put down as identities that I have?
Yeah. Next question.
Well, before
go
we
ahead, go ahead.
no, lots of barriers.
Yes.
So, sorry, Steve.
No, lots of barriers.
First, employee fear. So I think, and so in my company, yes, I have all the data. Me, one person. This is my job. And maybe 4 people in HR who are paid for privacy on data-related things. I still have employees, even though I say that publicly wherever I go, I still have employees that come to me and are afraid that their manager will see. I'm like, manager? Like, never, in a million years. In my North Star, I would never give this data to your manager unless you wanted me to, and that's my North Star, because I think it's important if you want it. So that's like so key and one of my number ones. Number 2, I don't think it relates to me. So I think about my firm and how many cisgendered, heterosexual white males there are, and it's still, you know, a large number. And they look at sexual orientation and they're like, I'm not going to answer that. It doesn't apply to me. I care. I still care. Everybody's got to go in and fill out every question, or I'm getting something wrong. I'm not programming the way I need to program for the organization. So that's another like major barrier. And I think the third major barrier to me is it's been around since 2015. Fortunately, at JP Morgan Chase, we've got a lot of tenure. Someone went in 2015, filled something out, and you know, it didn't look like it looks today. That was a long time ago. And we didn't have the same questions, we didn't have the same answer sets, and they've never wanted to go back in. Like, I want them to go in every year and refresh. Take a look at what's out there, Does it include you? And so I think those are our three biggest barriers right now. None of them small.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add, I mean, creating awareness of what it is a big barrier. And most specifically within the disability community, we often hear that there's a stigma of, you know, the manager finding out one thing, but then there's the whole education of, you know, is my condition a disability or not? Should I put this in the system? There's a separate process for accommodations. They don't always go necessarily, they're kind of both sides of the same coin. And then the only other thing I would add too is the environment we're living in. I mean, you know, many of the people in this room and around the country live in environments where they are our community is under attack, right? The LGBTQ community. So I think that creates an extra level of skepticism that feeds into the workplace.
Absolutely.
I would note, when I said technology, it's the background technology too. So if you're not familiar with your company's systems, ask the question of does our recruiting information transfer to our onboarding information, transfer to our employee experience information? Because I've learned as I've worked through this that we have about 7 or 8 different systems that make up our recruiting experience, our onboarding system, and then each different piece along the way. And if they don't feed into each other, people think they've answered the questions already. And sometimes they answered it in the first system, but the first system doesn't talk to the second or the third system, and the next thing you know, you have to ask sometimes these questions 3 times in order to get answers in all categories.
So, oh my God, I would love to have 7 or 8 systems. We have like 100 systems. So like
I may have simplified that a little.
I'll take a great example. So one of our self-ID questions is chosen name. So this is the name I want you to use for me everywhere, right? I have 100 systems that read name from HR, and each one of them have their own backlog. Each one of them are like, this is where you are in my prioritization list. So if you're a transgender member of my community, or you're in Asia Pacific and you use a US-based name, like you might log in and see, welcome, Bob, to your homepage in our JPMC at work. But then you might go one more page to take a training class and it'll say, you know, Priscilla, you have passed this course. So, I mean, it's terrible, the technology. Yeah. It's inhibiting to us and nothing, it's not all modernized yet, right? So I think technology is in a lot of our ways. So how do we get smart about getting prioritization?
It's like the systems don't trust each other enough to share the vital information.
Exactly.
And to keep it secure.
It's definitely one of the biggest barriers. I definitely think.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah. Wow. Okay, the next question, and I think we've addressed this some, but what are you doing creatively, what are you doing to increase adoption?
I'll expand on kind of the example I used from a communication standpoint. We also created kind of core and common presentation materials, and we were very strategic about socializing those. We have diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants who are aligned to all of the different lines of business. So we wanted to empower them to be advocates for this topic out in conversations with operating committee members, managers across lines of business, so that we were really kind of putting a very clear and consistent message out with a call to action. And we did that across our diversity councils as well. We kind of went on, if you would, a road show to really kind of provide that core and common. So opportunity, what questions came up? Do we need to evolve our talking points, FAQs? So I would say that was a big part of our approach, is really kind of getting an army of people versus it feeling like just a handful of people trying to move the needle on this.
We're in the process of kicking off a new campaign right now, and I'm actually pretty excited about it, because when you talk about campaigns, you know, I know there's a lot of marketing people in here, I love you, but a marketing campaign goes only as far as people who read it and follow it. To me, it's the activation you put behind it, the fun things you do to engage people, to really pull them in and do it. But this time we've taken our global campaign that focuses in on Please Tell Us About You, and really gotten into focusing in on there's a piece missing if we don't know who you are, and taking it more of that we're better together when we know all the pieces and how to put them all together and can look at them. And so we're using more of that imagery, but we also are building that into the things that we do from a competitive perspective. Sure, there's no one that's competitive in this room, but at EY, sometimes they get competitive between cities, between business units, between you name it. We take advantage of that. So we're going to have a little bit of competition, but it also was coming back to we're tying it into every single aspect of what we do. So if you want to come to conference, great. Once you've been accepted, you have to self-ID, or you don't get to go. You know, if you want benefits, great. We have amazing, wonderful benefits. After you're done completing your open enrollment, if you want to help us better provide benefits that align with our workforce, you have to self-ID. And so we're trying to drive a lot of that messaging into the key points where we know people are already on the computers, they're already doing something, and it almost comes off as a reward, if you will, rather than saying up front, we need you to do this. Go do this. And they can't really connect with what's in it for me.
So I think we have a lot of programming in place, but it doesn't seem like all of it is enough. So we've got a video campaign we've launched, which is very intersectional and isn't focused on any one dimension within self-ID. So people with disability, people from different races and ethnicities. So we've done that. We have a global campaign that our head of diversity, equity, and inclusion does with a video and an email to the firm and a company home article in our corporate internet. All the BRGs, right, go/self-ID. This is how you go self-ID at the end of their emails. We're doing some programming right now to explain what it all means. Like to Michael's point before, like I have a large population of asexual in Asia Pacific. And I question, do they all feel like they belong in the community or not? And so I want to go back with like definitions and explanations and things like that. So all of that is also in the works, but I don't know that any of that is enough because we still even haven't hit 50%. So there's a lot more to do, but we're trying to hit it from every angle, from every community, and from every level within the company to get people inspired. I think the one big thing we could all do better, to maybe Michael, you mentioned this before, is like, what's in it for me? Why would I want to do this? What will, and we're going to get to that when we get to the next set of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I call out a competitor? I don't usually do that. But
Sure, Crystal, you're getting this?
the one thing that I've seen work, I don't know, and is persistence. I mean, it is absolutely persistence in how you put it. So I mentioned that Canadian number we had is in the 80s in response rate. It's because they literally created a bot that would continue to send emails out until you filled out a blank. So you got an email until you filled in the blank in your self-ID. My understanding is Deloitte actually put it in their startup as part of their startup menu, so that when you turned your computer on,
It goes right there.
yep, it was there.
It's a nagging strategy.
Yeah.
A nagging strategy.
So
Okay.
persistency does seem to have a lot of effect.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things even my boss mentioned to me as one way to encourage more people to do is we hire a ton of people every year. So like make it part of their onboarding process. Like make it like you've now joined JP Morgan Chase. Self-ID is like really important. Go in there and fill it out now. Like nobody's gonna get your information, but this is part of being part of the firm. And so just from that alone, in 5 years, my numbers should go way up.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Next slide. There we go. I'll ask you, another Mentimeter. What barriers to self-ID are you experiencing in your organizations? This is probably more than just a word or two. And this is one of those that could live on beyond this workshop.
And we're especially interested in things we missed, because I'm
Yes.
sure we missed so much.
HR buy-in, not legally required, fear. Okay. All right. Know that you can continue to add your thoughts into that, and please do, because that's going to be valuable information for this group, this consortium. Next area, and the final area we're going to go into is how do you use all of this data to to have a strategic informed strategy. I mean, what do you do with it? So what are your thoughts? What reporting do you already have in place as far as that goes?
Yeah. I mean, two main reportings are completion rates and then just being able to see the pure numbers of who identifies as the different categories of LGBT. With us at EY, we have we have a sexual orientation question and a gender identity question, and we've put it both in there. They're so clunky that I'm not going to repeat them up on stage, though.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say similar for us, and one thing I would add as well is within our employee resource networks, we call them, our Pride network, we have over 14,000 members of the Pride ERN. We often cross that data. I think we know about 50% or more of members of the ERN self-identify as allies. So we overlay some of that data into the self-ID completion rates and overall LGBTQ affirmative responses. And then one other thing I would add too that we've done is we have developed at Wells Fargo executive forums. There are currently 4 of them, Black African American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latino, and women's, and we are in the process of adding LGBTQ, disability, veterans, and so on. And we use that self-ID data as well for the purposes of that. Those executive forums have been really instrumental in providing feedback from leaders across the company that gives us additional insight into opportunities and challenges that we face.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Michael, into our executive forum, which when we first stood it up, we only included in it people who we knew. So other executive directors and managing directors who were our gay and lesbian friends. And how sad is that? So at that time, we grew as large as 200 senior leaders in the firm who were part of our executive forum. And then I said, that's BS, and I need the data. So I want name by name of every out ED and MD who is open at work, right? Open at work. We're going to get to that, and that's really important because that's going to drive the future. Because if they're open at work, I should be able to use their data to inform our programming and help them progress in their careers. And so our executive forum grew to 450 people over the course of just a couple of months. And now every month I get refreshed because I get new data for people joining the firm and people who've gone in and finally self-ID'd. So that's our executive forum. On a reporting basis, I have a ton of it. And my data and reporting geek is in the back of the room. So I get monthly scorecards, which are so rich in information, and use them, and we do analysis and assessment on all of it to look at how we want to change programming. And then we do quarterly scorecards with aggregate data, so not names, that we share with the line of business diversity and equity leads. And they share with their talent leads. So at least the lines of business can see how they're shaping up in aggregate by country and state and city, and goals come next.
Very good, very good. So next question, what barriers, we've talked a lot about barriers in every phase of, every aspect of self-ID, but what barriers exist in your organization when it comes to securing, accessing, and actually using the data?
Well, before coming into leading this self-ID project, I knew nothing about the topic, and I've learned a little. But one of the things that I think is a barrier, and someone put this as feedback, was HR. So what I have learned at Wells Fargo is when we look at self-ID data, there's the federally government-required AAEEO data that companies have to allow employees to the option of providing that information. And then there's additional data that companies can add, like pronouns, things to go beyond that. And one of the barriers I think I ran into was, so who owns self-ID? Is it DE&I? Is it HR? And it's collectively, right? And I think kind of getting buy-in from the key stakeholders across both of those organizations to really determine what role each party plays and how we collectively come together to advance our efforts as a company. I would say that was a big learning and somewhat of a barrier, because then it gets into who owns the data and who pulls from this. It's a very it's a very deep rabbit hole, the topic of self-ID, I would say.
Yeah.
What else might you guys add?
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about the technology piece of it before too, but I think fundamentally on this one, if you can overcome that trust piece, and that came up in earlier as a barrier too, you need to be able to make sure people are trusting that you're going to keep the confidentiality of the information, but at the same time use it appropriately in a way that's going to help them. Because face it, we're in a what's in it for me society, right? I mean, everyone is really in this. Why should I provide this? Because it might come back later to haunt me in some form or fashion. So how is it that I can be certain that only the right people can access this information if you're going to give it? So you have that, you're constantly having that play of, here's what we're learning from the data, but you can trust us with your information. And the level of detail in which you can get access to it is still probably the biggest thing of who needs what information when, because everyone always feels like they need all of the information.
And Brad, I know you have no barriers.
I have
No barriers.
two left, just two, and both are huge. So the first one is I don't get systemic name-by-name data of out people for VP and below. I can get it, but each time I ask for it, it's a one-time data pull that I'm allowed to keep for a month. So if I just went to Asia, I needed data of people there to connect with. If they were out, again, if they were out, so I had to do one-time data pulls for that. So that's, I'm going to solve that. That's a next year thing for sure. I want name by name for everybody out. And then two is I can't share name by name with anybody. So unless I ask them. So I get systemically executive and managing directors. So the saddest thing is like the head of asset wealth management diversity came to me and said, I want to know my EDs because I'm running like MD radar. I'm doing like ED talent development for aspiring MDs. Can you give me the names? And so I went to them because I have their names. And I said, am I allowed to provide your name to the head of DE&I for that business, but she also runs talent. So surprisingly, only 85% of them came back to me and said yes. I mean, it's up to them, again, right? But I want to get to the point where I get it, the DE&I leads get it, and the talent leads get it, because, and that'll get to the next question, what do we want to do?
Yeah, yeah. And this next question is probably one of my favorite questions, I think, that we're asking today. So if you had access to all the self-ID data that you could ever dream of, what would you do with it? How would you use it? Just think perfect world.
We've got to let our data guy answer that first.
So as many of your organizations probably already have, you've got programs in place for women and Black and Hispanic to focused on getting vice presidents to directors, focused on grooming top talent, whoever those top talent are. I want that. We want that, right, for our community because we're underserved, underrepresented. So that's really instrumental into, we also want to ensure that we've got goals set for recruiting, for promotion radar, for talent development opportunities. And I want to set goals and then hold the lines of business accountable for fulfilling those goals. I've done that, so personally, we've done that. My team and I have done a prototype of what that would look like for this calendar year. This is my first full year in office. And most of the lines of business are hitting our goals. Like we set representation goals at the managing director, vice president, and overall population level. And the track record is 70% are on target for the goals we set, but haven't been able to share that with their CEOs or their talent leads. So they're just doing that by chance. So imagine the power if we actually set a goal and then held them accountable for delivering it. So all of that is coming, I'm going to say next year, all of that.
It's kind of hard to top. Because all that, and I want to be able to do that intersectional review of things that are in depth. Right now it becomes incredibly powerful when you can tell a leader that your region of the country only had X number of response rates or even head count, and this region had this number. And just that the comparison data is incredibly helpful. But then when you can start breaking it down by levels, by intersections of race, ethnicity, ability, veteran, et cetera, you start seeing different patterns. And the more that we hear talk of intersectional differences in advancement, in pay, in all of these other things that are very well known already from a race, ethnicity, and gender perspective, I think we would see very similar things, that we would start to find the patterns. And there's some research that's been done out there already about differences between lesbians and gay men. If we had the true intersections of all the identities, I think it would tell a very different story.
Powerful.
And it's so powerful, Chris, what you could do with that data. So I have that data in aggregate, and we've already started to use it to inform programming of nonprofit partnerships and like community-based engagements where we know the intersections exist in the cities where we're operating or cities that we're targeting to grow in. So it's really powerful what you could do even with basic information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you covered it all. The only thing I would add is storytelling, is kind of bringing those stories to life and bringing hopefully more people, letting people in. There was a session yesterday about letting in versus coming out, but really kind of encouraging people, showing that we are not just this box or that box, but we are multidimensional. I think that's another important part of it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, one more Menti poll, I believe, right? Let me see. So what other self-ID content is important to you? And again, this is one that you can answer right now, and know that you can also come back and answer that later today, even throughout the day. Let me see what we've got. We're all over the board, which is expected.
It's great.
It is. Some great stuff. All right, continue to answer that. Continue to answer that. These next couple slides are very important, so hopefully you can hang on with us here for the final few minutes. This is what's going to happen 1 week from today. So 1 week from today, we're going to have a breakout session. It's going to be a Zoom. It's going to be used, the platform. But you do need to register through the Pathable or through the Summit app, so that we have your information to send you that Zoom invitation. So make sure that you have done that. And I see a lot of people snapping the screen, which is great. We're going to go into detail even more into these evolving self-ID, to be fully inclusive, fueling adoption, and using the data to formulate a strategy in programming.
And this won't be us talking to you. This will be us talking.
No. It will be breakout groups. It will be virtual whiteboarding. It will be some very innovative ways of pulling more information, because unfortunately today we didn't have the time with a number of you as well to be able to do this, and we want to be able to do that because it's extremely valuable to the end product of this self-ID guidebook that's being developed and created. As well as to hear all these different perspectives. Everybody's going to come from a different perspective. So make sure that you've taken the time to do that. Scan that QR code or snap this screen. Okay. Next one. This is how you can reach us. It's not often I invite 300 people to email me. But hey, I'd love it. I'd love it. I'd love it. Just stay in touch with us. Reach out, and if you have questions, you've got all of our LinkedIn and email information here. This is another screen to snap. And stay in touch and let us know what you're struggling with and how we can develop this guide to be even better. So we'll come back to that one, but thank you very much. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Brad, Chris, and Michael. Thank you from myself. And somewhere in this audience is Michael Ronan. Where did you go?
Oh, he's in the back.
He's in the back. And he has been the driving force behind all of this on this session today. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.